Good morning. We turn to the story of Joshua and the walls of Jericho today. Um, this is the last of Looking at the Old in a New Way series. Next Sunday, we will move on to a new series. Um, and when I was looking at the list, my brain hadn't connected this before. Um, but Pastor Don has entitled this next series The Fourth Quarter. It'll come to you if you think about it for a moment. Football, right? It's football season here already as the weather starts to change. One thing I wanted to say in reference to last week and the story of Samson is that I failed to mention in the video is that all of these exploits that we have of Samson, up until the time that he's captured, he was only 18 years old when he was captured after Delilah shaved his head off. How long he was in captivity after that is a question. Whether there was a long period of time of captivity before he took the temple down and killed the Philistines or not. But everything up to that point, all of his exploits took place while he was still a teenager. And I thought that was remarkable. But we turn to Joshua and Jericho today. Joshua is the central figure in this story in the book of Joshua. And just to recap, Joshua is referred to as the son of Nun from the tribe of Ephraim, and he was Moses' right-hand man. He was the relationship between Joshua and Moses always has seemed to me to be like a father-son relationship. That we don't hear anything about Moses' children, but the relationship with Joshua there's a very, very close relationship. And one tidbit that I stumbled across, and I don't remember seeing this in scripture, and I didn't have time to go back and try to research it, but one of the commentaries referred to Joshua as accompanying Moses when he went up on the mountain to receive the Ten Commandments, and that it was Joshua who first heard the commotion in the camps as they were making the golden calf on the way down there. I don't remember that, and like I said, I didn't have time to go back and look at the scripture to verify that, but I did find that there in the commentary. Joshua was also one of the 12 spies that was sent into the Promised Land across the Jordan to see what the land was like, and Joshua was one of the two who, upon returning, had the optimistic viewpoint that this is doable, and it's doable because God said it was doable. And that was the basis of Joshua saying that. The other 10 said, no, these guys are giants. They're just chew us up and spit us out and we'll be nothing. I think the way they referred to it, they're giants and we're grasshoppers. But Joshua was one of those, and he had a faith in God. He was there with Moses in the wilderness, and as they were fighting the battles up to the Jordan River before they crossed over, Joshua was the military leader of the Israelite people. And one particular battle that's recorded there in Numbers, Joshua is leading the Hebrew people in battle, and Moses is standing there with his staff, with his arms out over the people, and there's a priest, Aaron on one side and another priest on the other side, holding Moses' arms up, because when his arms start to fall, the battle turns the other way. Well, that's Joshua leading that battle that's referred to there. Um, we talked last week about judges and them being political, spiritual leaders, military spiritual leaders, with some politics thrown in to the mix there. Joshua is actually the first of these judges. He's not in the book of Judges, and he's not in that lineage that you find in the book of Judges, but that's the way that Joshua rules, is in that area of being a spiritual military leader of the Hebrew people. One other interesting tidbit that this is not in Scripture. It's out of the Midrash of the Jewish rabbis. In other words, it's a tradition that has been passed down, is that that of Rahab. In the story of Jericho and the walls being destroyed, they send a spy in to scout out the situation, and Rahab befriends these men and protects them while they're there, and actually sees to their safekeeping. And they promise that she and her family will be kept safe. The story of the scarlet ribbon, or the rope that is tied outside the window, so that they know that this area is to be preserved. These people that are in this dwelling are to be spared. And this tradition that has sprung up out of the Midrash is that Rahab came to believe in God and became Joshua's wife. This is not Scripture now. I'm just telling you what the tradition is here. So don't go trying to find this in the Scripture, because you won't find it. But that their offspring, there were 8 sons who became prophets. And of those prophets, the most notable one in the list, that, as I looked at it, is Jeremiah, who after Isaiah, Jeremiah is the most prominent of the prophets in the Old Testament, considered the major prophets there. I just thought that was interesting that that's connected there to Joshua. There's no historical fact for that. This is just something that has come out of the tradition, these campfire stories, if you will, of the Hebrew people that have been passed down through the ages. Then we come to the crux of the matter here for this scripture today, and that's Jericho and its destruction. The city itself is a walled city. That was the way that cities were protected in that time. The walls, they found some remnants of these walls that date back to the time of Joshua, that they were 13 feet tall, many feet thick. In fact, they were so thick that there were dwellings within the wall, and Rahab lived in one of those dwellings. And so the ribbon on the wall, the cord on the wall window, would be facing on the outside of that wall, that they would be able to see that. There were watchtowers that were 28 feet tall that they could see out into the distance. And these were the way that they protected themselves. There were traditionally a water source within the city, and there were food stockpiles in there, so they could withstand a siege of some time within the cities. As I said, the Jericho is one of the oldest cities in ancient times, that they date the ruins there, and it's on the what's referred to as the West Bank. If you remember, Israel had that before the 7 Days Wars on the coast on one side, and the other side had this indentation in it, and then the Jordan River is over here. Well, that indentation over to the Jordan River, that's what's called the West Bank. area, and it's still disputed today as Palestine territory, and the Israel has created settlements in this area. So there's this back and forth. It's in that area where Jericho is located, east of Jerusalem, just north of the Dead Sea there. Coming as they were into the Promised Land, Jericho would have been on that main thoroughfare. They had to go through Jericho to get to where they were going, and there was some military strength there, and they needed to deal with that. And so God had told Joshua how he was to deal with it, and the instructions given to Joshua is that they would surround the city as the people had withdrawn into the city, and that for 6 days they would go out once a day, and then they would march the whole of the army. The way the scripture reads, it says all of the Israelite people, but in the commentaries that I read, they referred to it as the military, the army, march all the way around the city. They did this silently for 6 days, one time for 6 days in a row. And then on the seventh day, God had told them to go out, and that they were to march 7 times around the city, 7 times. And this is on the Sabbath day. I thought that was interesting too. There's no mention of that. It's just that it said on the 7th day to go out and to march around 7 times, and then at the conclusion of the 7th time, or during the 7th time, depending on how you read the scripture, that they are to blow the horn and that they are to shout for all their worth. And in that the walls came down, and then they were further instructed that they were to enter into the city and they were to utterly destroy it, except for Rahab and her family. That was to kill everybody in the city. They were to take no plunder. They were just to destroy everything that was there. Now, we have this story, and we tend to, I think, sometimes overlook this command that they were to destroy everything and not to take anything, and what the consequence was of that. But one of Joshua's people took some plunder, and in the following battle, the next time that they go into battle, they're defeated. And Joshua goes to God and wants to know, why did you desert me? Why weren't you with us here? And God communicates with Joshua that there's corruption within the camp, and gives directions as to how they're to find it. And then when they're discovered who the person was, then they are killed, and the entire family is killed, and the plunder that they had taken is destroyed. And then from this point on, then there's a purity there, and Joshua and his military conquests are successful. As often is the case with Scripture, the story is presented in a way that takes you from one event to the next, to the next, to the next. As an example, in the book of Acts, as you read through that, it sounds like that things are happening one from to the next, and there are years and years that we've documented that took place in between events. So this conquering of the land of the Promised Land did not happen as to one gigantic military campaign. It was something that happened over a period of time. Joshua's leadership spanned 40 years. Not sure if that isn't connected with the 40 years in the wilderness and somewhat of a tradition, or what the basis of that is, but it's just that his leadership is referred to as 40 years, and that he was 110 years old when he died. That's the story. what are the questions that it poses, or what are your thoughts about what the events that took place here?
Well, why would God say that?
Say
Kill
what?
all the people.
Oh, okay.
And then have the man and his whole family killed when they, well, I guess maybe if the whole family knew about it and was using this stuff, but seems a little harsh.
It is harsh, and it's one of those things that we struggle to come to grips with. This complete annihilation of populations in order to retain the purity of the Hebrew people. I don't have an answer for that either, but that's a question that this story does bring to mind that we have to struggle and to deal with. What about the supernatural events of the walls coming down?
How many soldiers were there going around the city?
Don't know.
Thousands, hundreds?
I would say thousands.
Old Israel nation. Well, they found out since then, like in to keep from having avalanches, they use sonic booms to make smaller avalanches to keep the bigger ones from developing. So sound has an effect on
There is.
either the structures or things of nature. And you have a sonic boom there and makes your windows rattle in the house.
Yeah.
Then makes pictures fall off the wall. So sound has an effect on structures and mountains.
Well, and there's the example of the opera singer, that high sustained voice that will shatter glass.
Every child I've ever had in any class loves the song, Joshua Fit the Battle of Jericho.
Oh, yeah, the song, yeah. But what you were saying, Roger, about the power there, I worked briefly when we were in Colorado in the Air Force, a part-time job at a stereo shop. One of the people at the site had a concession there, and he employed some of us to do his repair work. And I remember that in the shop, they sold new equipment. They had these gigantic speakers sitting in the store window, this plate glass window. When they would crank the volume up on the amplifier,
Do that.
you see the window vibrate back and forth from the base of those speakers there.
And that's just one little layer.
Yeah.
And another thing with me is on their movement from one area to another, I worked in quartermaster in the service. You gotta have a supply chain to keep your food, your ammo, your arrows or spears, everything up with you. So if they were constantly on the move, how did they raise crops to resupply the food supply without taking over the people's crops that were already living in the thing when
Yeah.
God told them to destroy it?
Good point.
You're destroyed. That's the reason the North ruined the South, was they was confiscating all the crops and food people had stored, and then they destroy everything behind them so that nobody else could come in behind them. So you were constantly having to resupply your men in service and keep supplies for them to, you take 10 arrows and shoot 10 arrows, and then what you gonna fight with? You gotta have somebody else bring you up another 10 arrows. So you were constantly having to make weapons as well as transporting them to keep them up with your main body so that they could keep the battle going. And like you said, Moses kept his arms up and the battle was winning. Well, they had to have, the Philistines had swords and iron work stuff because they were proficient in making iron tipped weapons when the Israelites weren't that proficient in doing stuff like that. So theirs was spears, slingshots, things like that. But before, when David could maybe throw a stone maybe 200 yards and hit something in the eye or in the temple. So it would, you have to have a whole lot of stones to be thrown to do that. So you have to
Yeah.
have either riverbeds or uncover some places where you get the right size stone. Try skipping a stone on a pond, you can't do a big one, you gotta get just flat, just right, hit it at the right angle. So you have
Well-
to supply them with food and weapons
There,
and keep the body together.
there are, as many of the stories, many of the events in the Old Testament pose more questions than they provide answers. But the key, I think, here is that faithfulness to God, and that God is able, the strength of God is able to conquer anything. I didn't ask you this ahead of time, but you mentioned the children, the song you taught the children.
Uh-huh.
Could you give us a little bit of that to close this out?
I will, but I wanna say, today in church, you are gonna hear that song, and you're gonna like it.
Okay.
Joshua
The
fit the
choir.
battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Joshua fit the battle of Jericho, and the walls come tumbling down.
Well, now you have a taste of what's to come later on in worship, and hope that you'll be joining us in worship later on. And God bless.